because in my head, numbers, like words, have colours and textures and personalities, a phenomenon that we call synesthesia. And though I didn't know about it at the time, synesthesia is very important in creativity. A writer, Nabokov, was synesthetic as well, and possibly autistic as well, although we wouldn't have known to diagnose him at the time. And in the same way as Nabokov, I see words with colours when I write. So I have a condition called high-functioning autistic savant syndrome. It's a quite an unusual condition in which the mind, the brain, connections between the different cells in the brain develop a little differently to most other people's minds. And one of the consequences of this change in my childhood was that, on the one hand, I had great difficulty with social interaction, for example, but on the other hand, I was able to develop certain faculties for language, for example, and numbers as well, because in my head, numbers, like words, have colours and textures and personalities, a phenomenon that we call synesthesia. And though I didn't know about it at the time, synesthesia is very important in creativity. A writer, Nabokov, was synesthetic as well, and possibly autistic as well, although we wouldn't have known to diagnose him at the time. And in the same way as Nabokov, I see words with colours when I write, and like him, I have my passions and obsessions with numbers, with chess, and so on. So my first novel, for example, was all about chess, a chess match between Soviet grandmasters in Moscow. And so what could have been a great handicap for many people, unfortunately, autism has many difficulties, for me has been finally a chance, an opportunity to understand the world from a different perspective and to find a path as a writer, because I think most people would agree that writers are quite unusual people as well, and they have this great force in coming at the world from a different angle. And as readers, people want to see the world through these different eyes. The word time is a good example. The word time as a word, time, it's orange. But it's important to add that the fact of having autism or of having synesthesia does not prevent me from thinking abstractly. So I'm able to entertain the idea of time as a phenomenon and to wonder, did time begin with the beginning of the universe, for example? Are there multiple universes and therefore multiple kinds of time? What would happen if the world didn't have 24 hours in a day, but 23 hours, for example? 23 is a prime number, so it would have quite significant consequences on how we conceive the passage of time. So I'm able to entertain these questions. I do that in my writing, and at the same time I have this quite superficial experience of synesthesia, so immediately the word is orange, and it gives me great pleasure, I guess. In poetry it's quite important. You're looking also superficially at the language itself and wanting to put words together in such a way as they are conveying something that's interesting, beautiful, possibly deep, ideally, but at the same time visually on the page is interesting, is beautiful as well. Well, language is something that I have always found fascinating, because I never had the experience of having a mother language, for example, a mother tongue. When someone is born on the autistic spectrum, you feel as if you're in a different country, a foreign language. You don't feel that you belong in your own country, your own language. And one of the reasons why I left England 10 years ago, why I married a Frenchman, why I live in France. I never use English, apart from when I write. I speak French all the time. So it was a struggle for me, acquiring language, understanding language. The social side of language was very difficult for me, but at the same time I was passionate. It was something that I was passionate about. And when you have a passion for something, you often have an ability, a special ability. And so again, like many writers, I have ability to learn languages and to understand different languages quite quickly. And the best demonstration of this was a long time ago, now over 10 years ago, when I was in a documentary and they chose a language, Icelandic. Now I was asked to learn this language in 1 week. Now, of course, strictly speaking, it is impossible to learn a language in 1 week, and it is impossible for me as much as it is for anyone else. But it's also true that I was able to learn enough Icelandic to give an interview in Icelandic after 1 week. So it's possible to do things that for most people seem incredible. But it comes both partly out of the way my brain has developed, seeing words with colours and seeing the way that words work together. The connections between words obviously is very helpful when you want to learn a foreign language, another language. But it's also just because for sociological reasons, I just find language fascinating as a phenomenon, just completely fascinating. And so when you find something fascinating, it's understandable that you become very good at it. On an everyday level, I use 3 languages: English, French and Icelandic. Icelandic because ever since I learned this language in 1 week, so to speak, I made wonderful friends in Iceland. I go there every year. I continue to use it. I write my emails in Icelandic. So it's not just a stunt. It really was an opportunity to discover another way of expressing myself and to read literature, wonderful literature in the Icelandic language. I also know some Esperanto, but Esperanto is not a language that we speak. It's a language that I can write. I've never heard anyone speak Esperanto. So every brain is incredible. Every brain is unique. In the past, we thought that autism, for example, was something that you couldn't change. That if you were born with a very small amount of social ability, you would die at a very old age, even with a very small amount of social ability. And now we know it's completely wrong. And that in fact the brain changes all through a lifetime. And so if you're born, as was my case, with autism, and you have lots of stimulation from an early age. I was very lucky, I had lots of stimulation, 8 brothers and sisters, so lots and lots of stimulation, very, very early. Lots of books, lots of reading. I think I learned an enormous amount of human feeling, empathy, through literature, reading, poems, novels, Shakespeare, and many other great writers. And my brain changed. And so today I have a career, I travel around the world, I give conferences in front of hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. My books have been translated into many languages, have sold many copies, have won awards. So it's amazing what I've been able to do, but really it's amazing, but it's also because we had from the beginning this wrong idea about the limits of what human people any kind of expression of humanity is capable of. And I think it's the same for anyone, that the moment we put limits on somebody and say this is as high as somebody can go, then instinctively I disagree. I think that very often we just do not realize how far we can go until we try. I'm very open to the idea of there being different kinds of minds, both human and non-human. For my part, I am not persuaded by the evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence. I know that many people ask me, is there life outside our planet? And I think from a purely mathematical point of view, there is no evidence at all that there is such a life, intelligent life outside of our planet. But saying that, I totally agree. There is a lot of intelligence on our planet, and humans are part of that intelligence, but they are not the final word concerning that intelligence. And that part of being human is being open to the idea that we can learn from plants, we can learn from animals, and that there are cultures, traditional cultures in many parts of the world before the Europeans settled that had this idea of the environment as something that was alive. And religion, for them, wasn't the idea of a church and a prayer and a Sunday and so on and a Bible. It was the idea that at any moment you could relate to the world outside of you, that the world did not begin and end in the lines of your skin, but that you could at any moment communicate with other forms of intelligence and be the better for it, be the richer for it. So I'm very open to this idea. And I would go further and say that also I feel that abstract forms of life, numbers and words, to what extent do they also participate in the human experience? Is it only the human being who invents numbers, invents words, or is it also that numbers and words help us participate in our ability to think and to create? That when a writer sometimes says, "Oh, I have this idea," and he suddenly writes a poem down from nowhere, and he says it's like something came to me, and a religious person would say, well, that's God, it's something from God. But another possibility is that it's the language itself that is coming to the poet's rescue and putting the words almost into his mouth or through his pen. So I'm very open to this idea as well, that all kinds of objects have some kind of intelligence, and that it's all about using our minds and language as well to... Many things can't speak. Animals and so on can communicate, but they don't necessarily use language in the way that we understand it. But we do, and it's also our responsibility to use this ability to speak on behalf of those things that don't have words, language. So it could be other forms of life, and it could be also inanimate objects. A poet, when he writes about a lamp, or when he writes about his own pen, he's giving life by giving language to these objects that normally we consider completely lifeless. And we can ask the question philosophically, is the poet giving life to the pen or to the lamp and so on, or is it that these things already exist in some way and that we are simply using our intelligence to communicate with them? By nature optimistic, so I hope the sword won't fall on our heads. I think that it's good that we have a growing awareness of the need to be respectful both to each other and to the environment, to the planet as well. And that I think it's good to give warnings, but I think it's also dangerous to maybe only give warnings, because when you only give warnings to people, then sometimes they choose to go the wrong way. You know, they don't like being told off too often, too much, like being scolded like a bad child. So I think it's better than to scold is to give an idea of the future of our planet, of our society, that is persuasive enough that people instinctively, intellectually want to be part of that. And I think this is what writers are very good at doing, and poets and journalists. And the moment you pick up a pen, it's an act of civil disobedience in some way. You're wanting to make the world better, because if you didn't, you wouldn't bother picking up a pen at all. And from that moment that you pick up a pen and you make this gesture and you write and you make your voice heard, then I think so long as you can get that voice heard by other people, you publish your work, it finds an audience, you can persuade. And the best way, I think, to persuade, the most persuasive forms of writing are often those that are least didactic, those that least try to show that, you know, this is what we're trying to tell you. We're trying to make this very important point. No, it's better to tell a story. Humans love stories. We're instinctive storytellers. And the moment that the story is well done, then I think it's persuasive enough on its own terms, and the story that we can tell about our world, our planet, our environment, as long as it's well told, will persuade enough people, I'm sure, in the future. So I'm going to be optimistic here and say I think the world will go on for a very long time, and we will find solutions. I think the key word is tool. It's a tool. And from the moment that we understand that it's a tool, it depends what we do with it. It's like language. We can use language in a way to inspire and to entertain and to educate. And we can use language to humiliate and to insult. And so it all depends what we're doing with it. And internet, if it's used in a way that helps people to connect with each other over very great distances, that's wonderful. I have friends in Iceland and in Canada, Quebec, in different parts of the world, and I can communicate with them instantly with internet, so it's wonderful. And on the other side, I've also seen with programs, networks like Twitter and Facebook and so on, the dangers, the downsides as well, that people very often will be very quick about typing something that's actually quite painful for other people to read or to see, and can be quite insulting. It's paradoxical. At the same time, it brings us closer together, and it also creates distance as well. It also encourages people to live in bubbles. And I spent so long in a bubble as a child with autism that I would never encourage anyone to want to live in a bubble, whether it's internet or